Good evening, welcome again to Insight. My viewers who've been waiting patiently, at least we're here. Sorry for the delay, the technical difficulties, but nonetheless, we are here. Today we're going to discuss what I consider to be one of the most important topics there is anywhere in the world. We're looking at post-traumatic slave syndrome, an issue which most people tend to shy away from, and I think a lot of people feel embarrassed to discuss. But Insight, we tend to break the barriers and push the borders out and bring you the information that we think is necessary to re-educate and motivate. To discuss this with me today, I have two elegant guests. Sister Esther, who's been here before. Again, welcome to Insight once again.
Thank you.
And as per usual, my lieutenant and partner, Bilal Hugh. Welcome to the show. Sister Esther, as the topic lent itself, post-traumatic slave syndrome. Could you give us a quick synopsis, Esther? Let's get straight into it. What is it?
Okay, basically, I mean, the term has been in popular usage for some time. It was first, I believe, coined by psychiatrists Alvin Poussant and Amy Alexander in around 2000. But it's more popularly associated with Dr. Joy DeGuy.
Because some clips over here we'll look at that, yes.
And it really speaks to the legacies of trauma, multi-generational trauma, that have been passed down throughout the generations and continue to impact on us in a negative way. And Joy in particular talks about multi-generational trauma together with you know, a lack of advancement in society and continued oppression, as well as the absence of an opportunity to heal and restore ourselves, actually results in what she calls post-traumatic slave syndrome. And so post-traumatic slave syndrome speaks to a number of behaviors and beliefs that actually do not serve us very well today, but at one time became necessary as part of our survival process, but are no longer serving us as a people. So that's essentially what it's about.
Okay. Bilal, I know you've been doing some intense research leading up to this. What's your take? I mean, you've got some clips from Joy that we look at, but what's your take on it, Bilal, first of all?
Yeah, so post-traumatic slave syndrome is a very interesting idea because, as the sister mentions, it existed before Sister Joy really came and really fine-tuned it, modified it, and then applied it to, you know, African people in the diaspora, America, essentially the Americas. But I guess it also applies to those of us in the Caribbean or from Caribbean heritage. But it's, you know, the idea of this transgenerational trauma, and I think it was discovered by a psychiatrist that was looking at, you know, was it Holocaust survivors and the children of Holocaust survivors in Canada. And then they discovered that their, you know, children of Holocaust survivors were being flagged up for psychiatric services at something like 200% in compared to the sort of national average. That not necessarily that they were being diagnosed with psychiatric disorders, but they were experiencing certain psychosocial problems that made them become aware to those, you know, the authorities. So it's like a kind of general idea, but then you modify it, fine tune it, as the sister has done with some outstanding work, and apply it to a people. And hopefully we can look at, you know, some of the kind of solutions or treatment plan or, you know, this type of thing, maybe in the latter part of the program.
Sister Esther, one of the things you want to look at, and like I say, we're quite pushed for time, is, let's say, the causes and effects. We're talking about the pathologication of the whole thing, how we can, you know, let's look at the causes and effects. What are the causes and what are the effects of post-traumatic slave syndrome? Okay,
basically the cause of post-traumatic slave syndrome has been what some of us refer to as the Ma'angamizi. Some people may know the term Ma'afa, the African Holocaust. We use the term Ma'angamizi because it's more appropriate, that speaks to the intentionality of a Holocaust against African people. And so that Ma'angamizi has had three main phases: the chattel enslavement phase, the colonial phase, or colonial enslavement, colonialism, and now the contemporary modern day phase of neo-colonial forms of enslavement. So it is a continuum. However, in Joy de Groy's sort of analysis, she focuses very much on the chattel enslavement period and how that continues to leave legacies that have been passed down throughout the generations. So that's the cause. It's basically when you remove a people, you oppress them, you subjugate them, you dehumanize them. Basically, it prevents that people from actually being self-determining. And that is, you know, the root causes of this problem. In terms of some of its effects, they are varied and multiple. But essentially, it's about some of the internalization of racist socialization that we have developed, some of the negative self-concepts. Joy talks about learned helplessness. She talks about vacant esteem, not even low self-esteem, where literally we have none or very little esteem. It's not just an individual thing, it's about how we relate to one another. Crab in a barrel syndrome, this community distrust that we have internalized as a result of this historic and contemporary form of injustice and oppression. So those are just some of the basic effects, and I'm sure there's a lot more.
Bilal, you want to add to that list?
Yes.
You want to add to that?
I mean, maybe I could put it in a nutshell by saying, look at our popular culture. Look at our art form, our music form, and our visual arts in terms of movement or dance and lyrical content. Is evidence of, you know, people with difficulties. I mean, there are obviously within our art form there are going to be revolutionaries and people that are positive and progressive, but they don't dominate the popular square. They're fringe or underground. Do you get what I'm trying to say to you? So whether you listen to the spoken word artists or the rappers or, you know, those who are putting words together, they tell you the condition of a people. It's not necessarily that. It's not always that the rappers are the ones leading the community astray. Sometimes they're just reflecting and like a mirror, just displaying the ills of what really exists in the community.
I got a WhatsApp here from someone. You might want to deal with this one. Why do we need to discuss this issue now? Shouldn't we just move on? I mean, yeah. So where we are with that?
How can we move on?
This person from the UK actually.
Sure.
So.
I mean, that's a common answer, and in fact, that is part of what even, you know, some theorists such as Frantz Fanon spoke about cognitive dissonance, you know, where we're failing to accept reality, that some of us, and a large proportion of us, have been massively harmed. Obviously, some are more well-adjusted than others, but to deny that this level of oppression, you know, has impacted on us is actually to deny our humanity, because all other peoples who have experienced any form of racial terrorization, enslavement, colonialism, have different, you know, derivatives of this type of syndrome. So why would we as African people be any different, unless we are saying we are superhuman, and in fact we are not human at all. So we cannot just move on when we fail to properly you know, look at the impact of this history on our present, and also how we are continuing to carry on through our socialization, in families, in our community and the wider society, to sort of correct these sort of, you know, negative impacts.
You got a clip? Let's take a look at that clip and see what we can do with that.
And that really gives a perspective on what this trauma was, what it looks like, and clinically, what is post-traumatic stress disorder? What does it look like? Now, let me give you a little snapshot. We'll get into it in more depth a little later. But post-traumatic stress disorder, if in fact you are diagnosed with that, again, remember, direct or indirect trauma, here are some of the symptoms. A feeling of foreshortened future. Now, what does that mean? A feeling, well, you're not going to live long. How many of you are running into young people that don't believe they're going to make it past their 20s? Feeling of foreshortened future, exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, difficulty falling or staying asleep, hypervigilance, right? These are symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is like DSM stuff, Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's in there. And there's a whole listing of all these symptoms. Now, I want to roll it back So you can understand what the transmission theory is, because I'm going to talk about transmission. So how does a person that's been traumatized by post-traumatic, literally has a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, and can we, if we are logical and we are reasonable people, assume that a fair number of Africans had to have had post-traumatic stress disorder? You think? I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about them. Untreated, though, right? Okay, so now let's do the math. Mom, who saw dad sold or sister raped, has post-traumatic stress disorder. Still mom, though, right? Only mom now has outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future, difficulty falling or staying asleep, hypervigilance. That would be mom. Now, Johnny or Mary or Shaquisha did not have the original trauma. But what are they learning? This is called social learning theory. What am I normalizing? Exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger. Are you following me? So I didn't have to be traumatized. Now, the other thing is, do you think Johnny and Mary got traumatized too? Do you see? So what happens in your environment, you learn from the significant others in your environment. And if they're broken, guess what you're going to be? You're learning from broken people. And you're normalizing that behavior. And then it becomes, years later, 2008, that's their culture. That's just the way they are. That's their culture. So there's poison in the cookies, right?
Esther, Bilal, who want to pick up on that? From a psychotherapist perspective, Bilal. How damaging?
Really interesting comments by the doctor. But there is a school of thought that says, in some respects, there's elements of it that are problematic because they may seem too deterministic, and also it doesn't address, when, for example, Dr. DeGroote makes a point in saying that, talks about it being untreated. And there's an argument to say, as much as we've been displaced, as much as we've received injury, we've always been treating ourselves, not with on the counseling couch and necessarily having psychoanalysis once a week, twice a week, but we've had, whether it's in song, dance, prayer, fast, spiritual practices, and our culture has been always a way of trying to heal and address the maladies that we experience. And also, there's the issue that we have to always remember our agency. And when I mean our free will, it's very powerful and we have a great potential. So I would never want to be in a situation where when our behavior falls below a standard which is effective or acceptable or civil, that we, some will use it as a fallback mechanism to say, well, you know what it is, I've got PTSS, I can't do no better. We can do better, we must do better, and we have to find ways to do better.
Sister Esther?
Yeah, I agree with that point. Whilst it is very useful to look at what has happened to us, but we must not get fixed on a diagnosis, as it were, or a label. And that has been some of the critiques, if you like, of post-traumatic slave syndrome, in terms of how do we ensure that this doesn't then become another tool to pathologize us and to make us feel like we cannot escape from our past and we cannot escape from the current reality. And of course, it doesn't always, take into consideration that the fact that we are still here because we are a resilient people and we have learned not only to survive, but we have also learned to recreate ourselves, to recreate culture, and to also develop as a people despite everything that has been going against us. So we must bear in mind those two, I think, streams going at the same time. Yes.
Bilal, we're looking at causes and effects. Black people in the world today seem to be going around in circles. Could we directly relate that to post-traumatic slave syndrome? Because as the person texted a while ago saying, shouldn't we just move on? It's happened like 5 centuries ago. Why are we still bringing up this stuff today? Let's move on and be happy guys. Just put on our suits and ties and look how smart. Our degrees and PhDs and just move on. Isn't that something we can just brush away and move on?
All right, I would agree, but we're only within a context. Like, say, for example, some people use a phrase, come on, man, black people need to get over slavery. I 100% agree, but what is the context in which you mean that? If you mean to suppress my pain and my right to hurt, or you mean to suppress my right to look back and figure out and chart out a new path and ideology for myself, then I don't agree. If you're trying to silence me. But if you're saying, yeah, we need to get over it, meaning, yeah, we do need to get over it to move forward, but not to ignore. So I think that sometimes there are those of us who find it painful. The emotion of shame, we can't underestimate the emotion of shame. You know, shame is linked not just to the individual, but the group. You know, on a psychological level, shame is linked to the group that one is associated with. So you often find with our people that they, as individuals, they made some progress in their life on a material level, on a career path, but they still feel ashamed about their blackness or their link to Africa, so they want to almost separate. So you see this in the cosmetic world, you see this in terms of who people may choose to copulate with. There's signs and symptoms of a deep level of shame that's almost pathological at times. That's what I think. So I would agree, we got to move forward, but there's always a context into what do you mean when you say we're going to move forward.
Well, I will add to that and say that it's hard to move forward when something is still continuing. So chattel enslavement is not continuing for the majority of our people, but it does still exist. Let us not forget that. There are still Africans who are actually in chattel slavery today in certain parts of the world. And if we look at enslavement as a continuum, then we know that, as we say, the Maangamizi continues. So we cannot move on until we end this system of, you know, this Maangamizi that has got many different manifestations. You know, some people will talk about imperialism, white supremacy, racism. There are different manifestations of it, but until we can recreate our world in our image and likeness, then we will not be able to move on. We will not be able to properly heal and restore ourselves in a sustainable way. And it's not just about some of us who may be in more affluent countries where we may feel we're doing okay. I think we have to judge our elevation by, if you like, the majority of us. How are the rest of our people faring?
We are trying to make connection with Jomo Thomas from St. Vincent to some technical difficulties, so bear with us. If he can't join us by Skype, he's trying to get us on by phone, so let's try and hope that the brother can join us. He has some serious contribution to make from the Caribbean. But Esther, moving on, it's a topic that led black people to believe, let the Jews celebrate the Holocaust and let these people do this stuff, but for us, we need to just, gosh man, let's just be ourselves, you know, and what can be done to break us out of this spell of, let's use the word self-worth now. We don't worth anything. What can be done to move us forward in terms of a progressive people? We talk about reparations. We talk about other things to help us. How could we link, let's use the word reparations and this whole syndrome? Is there a link between both of them?
Absolutely. Reparations in terms of repairing ourselves, restoring ourselves, regaining our place. We have to remember, we didn't just lose some money, we lost a world, and we lost our place and status in the world. We lost our connection, as it were. It's not that it cannot be recovered, it can, and that is what the reparations movement is about. So I would say part of what we can do is continue that process of resistance to the Maangamizi in its contemporary phase and transcendence at the same time. But that resistance is about building the new. It's not just about tearing down the old. It's about what we call a prefigurative politics. It's us becoming the change that we want to be and see in the process of liberating and emancipating ourselves. So that struggle for emancipation continues. It's not just economic emancipation, it's cultural, it's spiritual, it's cognitive emancipation, it's holistic emancipation. And so that continues. And many of our great theorists and revolutionaries, I think Frantz Fanon was correct, that there is something healing actually about a people fighting for their freedom and actually seeking to restore their own power by our own efforts. So essentially, until we're able to restore our power to affect the reality around us, then we are not going to be able to actually repair this damage effectively. So it is, for me, I'm afraid, a struggle for power.
Don't be afraid.
You know, a struggle for power, because it is, we have to be able to harness and amass the power, which we have. It's latent, but we have to be able to use it to actually assist us as a people, and to develop institutions that actually help promote our positive culture, our positive values that have actually sustained us up until this point.
I see Bilal nodding vigorously. You want to add to that, Bilal, or she's just said it all?
No. I mean, what the sister's saying sounds right and exact, and I mean, all I can do is add on. I can't take away, but I just like to add on. I mean, when the sister Esther speaks about power, straight away my mind went to one famous doctor, Dr. Amos Wilson, because he actually wrote a book about an instruction manual for obtaining power. And you know, sometimes we're taught that to seek power is something that is vulgar, or is something that is not in good standing, because it seems as if, you know, you're trying to control people. But we're talking about self-determination. I think it's Kuchagelia, they call it in the original language. But you know, Amos Wilson said something very important. He said that the critical role of education is the survival of a people. So we have to be about education, not necessarily classroom education, but as this is saying, whether it comes on a cultural frequency, whether it comes through the sound, whether it's visually, whether it, you know, because people are different types of learners. They learn through touch, through sound, through movement. We learn in different ways, but we have to provide like in these mediums a new message, a new ideology, almost like a new conscious gospel, if I can put it that way, you know.
I've got another text. This person's call is texting from WhatsApp from the USA. Are there any post-traumatic slave syndrome centers in the UK or US offering help and support for blacks? Esther, do you know of any, Bilal, of any? Or should there be any for that fact?
I'm not sure about the UK or even the US.
I haven't heard of any in the UK.
I haven't heard of any in the US, but I'm sure there are different, I know there are different practitioners who are engaged in, you know, cultural resiliency and positive mental health that apply in a very practical way these theories to assist people in terms of, you know, individual well-being and sort of family counselling and building sort of initiatives. So I don't believe there's
exactly right. Like culturally aware and appropriate counselling. And group counselling, group therapy, things of that nature, intervention groups. There's things going on, but not with that brand. And I think that's a good idea, actually, because I don't know about putting the word slave, you know, the word slave, and then sometimes we're trying to, as descendants of Africans, trying to get away from our history didn't start with slavery, so we don't want to get fixated on that terminology.
Bilal, you're a psychotherapist, and of course you have your own practice, but do you come across people who come in to see you speaking about this sort of trauma, or they talk about something completely different?
No, I tell you where I'm encountering.
Or are they too afraid to speak about it?
No, I'll be I work for a national charity. I see people of all different races, and in my private practice, I see people of all different races. But essentially, when I came into contact with Africans, the most was, unfortunately, when I was working in the criminal justice system on Suicide Watch. And what I discovered was young people who showed the signs and symptoms. They didn't articulate. They were young people, teenage, 15, 16, up to 21. They didn't articulate it in that way, but sitting down, being silent, learning from them, pure signs and symptoms of transgenerational trauma. Not as if as the doctor says, not that they had been traumatized, but almost like aspects of our culture. People are being indoctrinated into certain behavioral traits and certain value systems. So we have to be able to address that. So that's where I came into contact with. Definitely our people, you know, and the young people often get the blame because of, you know, street violence, knife crime and gun crime and things of this nature. But my opinion is that we're all one family, and that's just an aspect of the family displaying certain traits. It's not like they are the bad guys. It's just, you know, the youth, you know, some of the youth are in that world.
It seems as though Joma won't be able to join us, unfortunately. One of the questions I wanted to put to Joma was, and I put it out, before we do that, let's look at the second clip and we'll discuss that issue with the Caribbean after this clip. Go ahead.
Never. Second question. After slavery was officially over, now you're free. Anybody remember any therapy then? We know it's been rough, it's been deep for you, it's been difficult. We're going to do a little group therapy. Anybody remember that? That would be no. Number 3, after slavery officially ended, both in the States, in the Caribbean, the British ended, do you remember whether or not trauma continued? Did the trauma continue for people of African descent? I need to know. Okay, so now let's do the math. Hundreds of years of trauma, no treatment. Freed, more trauma, no treatment. What do you do the math? Do you think there may be residual impacts of that trauma? Of course there is. It didn't end, friends, and it hasn't ended yet. So I think on one point, African people and people of African descent are extremely resilient. Matter of fact, I think we're a miracle. Far be it for us to pathologize or to look and cast this idea of weak and sick people. Oh, on the contrary,
Okay. Sister Esther, we're talking about, she seems like it is. Because the healing process needs to take place. One of the questions I'm going to put to Joe, unfortunately, won't be able to join us, like I said, is, and I asked him this in the brief, how widespread is this concept in the Caribbean? And he said to me, basically, nil.
Okay.
So a lot of work needs to be done throughout the diaspora to make sure people understand what post-traumatic slave syndrome is, because in the schools in the Caribbean, it's not being even mentioned. The politicians, very few would know what it is, if any at all. 1 or 2 may understand what it is. But in terms of making a change, let's use the word, adjusting just the psychological balance, it needs to start with the next generation of young people needs to understand what it is. And if that's not taking place yet, we kind of have a long road to travel. Unfortunately, Joe can't join us because what sort of work is there being done in the UK, Esther, to make sure that the youngsters are talking about the 7-year-olds and the 10, if any at all, to get this message out? I mean, your circles, you might find them in your circles,
Yes.
but beyond your circles, what
I
hope
think
is
you'll
there?
probably find similar, patterns in that there's a lot of good work being done by a small amount of people. And unfortunately, it's not systemic and it's not necessarily always institutionalized. And so there's only so much individuals can do. And it's part of that double-edged sword of what does it mean to have greater recognition of this? And how do we ensure that if we do not build the power to stop it, that actually the well-meaning professionals in the system, it will then become just another industrial complex that pathologizes us. So there's a real battle that we have on our hands. And I do go back to the earlier point that was made of the importance of real education, education for liberation and emancipation, and for us to be educated in the true sense of the term as to what this means and its impact on us, but also what we do to actually, transform that situation. So that's going to be key. Developing that curricula that is, lifelong learning, that is family education, that is sort of, person-centered education as well, not just the formal schooling that takes place, and through all the different mediums that we learn, in particular, popular culture, that many of us are just, consuming, often uncritically. So we have to work with many different players in society. We have to be working with our artists. We have to be working with our community and development workers. We have to be working with our educators to look at how we can be getting more information out. I also think there is an issue with the terminology, because post-traumatic slave syndrome is one actual terminology for looking at these types of behaviors that are, not serving us. But there are many different ways of classifying it. And so we shouldn't necessarily limit ourselves to just a post-traumatic slave syndrome label, because so many of our theorists, our social workers, our mental health professionals have been looking at this in different ways. And plus, in particular, Joy de Gruy's work is focused on African Americans. There's a need for a lot more research and scholarship and education about the different ways that this manifests amongst different African populations. So we know that there's the trauma of people who are displaced from homeland as refugees and so forth, as an immediate trauma. There's different traumas around, you know, gang or so-called street violence and internalized violence that many of our young people are kind of can't even go to school without being subjected to some kind of, you know, sort of postcode war or what have you. The trauma of seeing friends die early through so-called gun crime and knife crime. So there's all these different forms of trauma that we have to look at, I think, as a collective experience and the impact that it is having on us as a community. And the way forward is not to deny that these things are happening. It is to actually recognize what is happening to us and therefore take responsibility for doing what we can to actually change that situation. But the responsibility is not ours alone.
We're going to run out of time. Bilal, briefly, you did some work or did an interview recently with Robin Walker, and what he does on Saturdays is have a Saturday class teaching specific subjects in African history. You think it is necessary for us to take on that role of educating the next generation?
I think definitely, and I think that education is key, but you have this. Although history is vital, I'm going to say something that's controversial, but if I don't say it, I'm going to burst.
You're on inside.
There are 3 subjects. I think it was Attorney Alton Maddox, I heard him talk about education once, and he said there's 3 subjects. If you don't put them in your curriculum for African people in the diaspora, you ain't teaching them anything. And he said the 3 subjects are, one is the science of breeding or copulation, or how to pick a mate and to build a family. The second one is the science of wealth accumulation and wealth management. Not money management, wealth management. And the third one, he said, is the art of war, meaning thinking strategically, whether it's like within the business world, you have to think on terms of tactics and strategies and be critical thinkers in terms of being competitive. Not necessarily go out and punch anybody in the face or start a war, but to think on that level. He said, if you aren't teaching our people those things, if you're entering into sports just to play, although we're athletically gifted, we need to start going into the management. We need to start going into the coaching so that we start to think on that ownership level, and on that level of being strategic.
Esther, you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say to a large degree I do, and I feel that we also have an opportunity though to look at, from a reparations perspective, reparations are about turning everything around. It's like a revolutionary perspective, actually, that goes to the root of it. So when I was listening to about, you know, values that get held up, in business, being competitive, actually, if we're going to go back to our values, we have to go back to forms of communalism that are not based on competition. See, these are some of the things that we've learned that have become necessary to survive, but then we have to envision a world beyond the world that we know today. That's what we have to do, so that we can get back to being who we are. Not who we were, but who we are, because we are still in a process of becoming as a people.
Listen, we're going to leave it there. Listen, we completely run out of time. We have to come back and do a part for a much longer stint. Viewers, thanks for being with us today and for your texts on WhatsApp. And Brother John, we have to bring you on the next one. But please, we're going to do a part. We'll let you know when we're going to... We're going to come back. We're going to do this again. We're going to do this again. So join me next week for another program on Inside. I'm Rashid Rose. Have a good evening. Have a good weekend. Take care. See you. Bye.